This is TWiT.
The question is, this is a feature we're losing in Firefox, to change the page or stay where you are. 7 years ago, Blair McBride over at Mozilla opened a question about what Firefox's Backspace key should do. He opened a Mozilla bug report, although it's not a bug, but the Bugzilla system is just the common way they manage all issues of any sort. And so 7 years ago, he wrote, pressing backspace does different things depending upon where the cursor is. If it's in a text field, not surprisingly, it deletes the character to the left. If it's not in a text input field, it's the same as hitting the back button. Whether to keep this behavior has been argued, and then he has in all caps, for a very long time. It's confusing for many people, he suggests, but we've assumed it would break muscle memory for many people. However, the muscle memory argument was mostly an assumption. As far as I know, we didn't have a useful usage data. Didn't have useful usage data until now. He says, so now we have or can get useful usage data to either back up the muscle memory argument or to squash it once and for all and remove backspace as a shortcut for navigation. Okay, that's 7 years ago. During the past 7 years, there has been a long and winding and storied thread accruing comments, observations, and opinions, and lots of feelings, until 12 days ago. The issue was declared resolved, and the long outstanding question for Firefox's handling of the backspace key was at long last answered, or at least resolved. They wrote, we should not overload common user actions. And for those who are not familiar, overload is a term that comes out of object orientation, where you can put more functionality into an existing expression, which then uses the context of the expression to determine what it does. It's kind of cool, but it can also be confusing. And that's exactly the problem here. They're talking about overloading common user actions, meaning that the backspace key would be context dependent. Anyway, they said with backspace, it behaves as you would expect in one context, deleting text, but in another subtle context, text box not selected, it has a destructive action. Now, the reason they call it destructive is maybe you were filling in data in a form and you had a lot, you'd worked at it for a few minutes, and then somehow the insertion point was not in the form, but you didn't realize that, and you hit backspace intending to remove a character that wasn't going to get removed, and that was interpreted by Firefox as hitting the back button, thus clearing, stepping you back before you receive the form, losing all of that work. Thus, they call it destructive. That's what they mean. So they said this creates a high likelihood scenario for a common user behavior, deleting text, to trigger a less likely user behavior, which is using a keyboard shortcut to navigate back. They said this investment resolves the overloaded function and closes the gap on user behavior, which is a strange way of putting it. But they said Firefox is the only browser using the backspace key, meaning today, as a keyboard shortcut for navigating to the previous page on a tab. This was originally implemented to follow IE's behavior. We don't go to the previous page if you use the shortcut inside a text input. There are several reasons that make a good case for removal of the shortcut. And let's see, the argument to retain backspace keyboard shortcut for muscle memory for users migrating to Firefox or using Firefox along with another browser does not apply anymore. Edge has now replaced IE as a default Windows browser without a similar shortcut. And they mentioned that Alt left arrow is the only keyboard shortcut now available for this. Chrome also only implements Alt left arrow because, again, Chromium, is common to both browsers. And they said Chrome had this shortcut and removed it because of user data loss risks. So they finish, the backspace key shortcut on Firefox is by far the keyboard shortcut with highest usage, with 40 million, and they use the abbreviation MAU, monthly active users, which is well above Find in Page, which actually I use a lot. That has 16 million, 16 million monthly active users, or Page Reload, which is 15 million monthly active users. So this raises concerns that our users are suffering usability issues and data loss issues from hitting this keyboard shortcut by mistake. In other words, they can't determine whether it was deliberate or a mistake. So, but they're noticing it's getting hit a lot. 40 million, more than search in a page or reload the page. So anyway, but because Backspace is so popular, and this podcast is a favorite among the more technically oriented, I would not be surprised to learn that a good percentage of those 40 million monthly active users who are using Backspace to deliberately go back to the previous page might be listening to this podcast and suddenly be confused or annoyed to discover that its use for that purpose has finally come to an end. We're currently at Firefox 84. That is after those critical updates that I just mentioned. That brought us to 84. The change has been merged. This change in the handling of Backspace has been merged into the Firefox Nightly 86 builds. So we can expect to see Backspace's behavior being neutered once 86 makes it to the main release channel. The good news is that the Boolean setting for it can be turned back on. As usual, you put about:config into the URL of your Firefox browser and hit enter. That brings up a bazillion settings. You now have to agree to accept the awesome responsibility that accompanies making any changes behind the scenes, and then search for the string browser.backspace. One item will be found. It's browser.backspace underscore something. I don't even remember now what it was, but just search for browser.backspace and you'll find it. The option in my Firefox 84 was Boolean 0. And that does give you page-changing backspace behavior that we've always had. And I experimented with it. I set it to 1 and then restarted Firefox, assuming that I had to. I didn't actually check that. And that, sure enough, causes backspace to be ignored when you're not entering text. And so the point is, this is already in there, and it's in about:config, one of Firefox's bazillion settings. So this suggests that with release 86, they're going to simply flip that existing 0 to a 1 in order to flip the default behavior of Firefox. And so anybody who will miss that can easily go in and turn it back to 0 as it is today.